Hi, I'm David Dunlop and welcome to my studio here in Connecticut. This is where I paint all of my pictures. Today I'm going to do something different. Today I'm going to think about skies. And I'm going to think about skies as people thought about them hundreds of years ago. Artists like Jacob van Ruisdael and Turner. They didn't paint their pictures by going outside and taking a walk. They had models. Here we are in the middle of the 1600s. His uncle has been painting for a while. Lots of families in the Netherlands who are artists pass the business along. It's not new. Raphael's father was an artist. Picasso's father was an artist. We know about the Wyeth family, N.C., Andrew, and Jamie Wyeth. It's just not surprising because they had models, like a family of bakers or a family of attorneys. They had models that this is what you can do. Now, anybody who has the passion to paint can paint. Some of the greatest painters didn't have those models, but they had the models to look for in terms of paintings. Turner's father was a hairdresser and he wasn't a painter. But what he had was what Jacob van Ruisdael had, passion. He had the desire, he had the enthusiasm. It was burning in here to try to capture a psychological condition that he felt when he looked at artwork. But he needed a model. So he's looking at these other models. This sky is not a sky that he painted on location. It's a sky he found in other paintings, and he started changing it. He started mutating it. He had a set of principles of design, like we have principles for language or poetry. That set of principles of design is the first way to start a picture like this. And that's where we're going to start. Before I get to luminance, before I get to iridescence, before I get to sparkle and light in the sky, we have to get to design. Let me show you. Do you notice that the angle comes down? See this angle of the clouds, and it comes down into these trees? Now look at the shape of the trees. See, the shapes of the trees are the kind of rounded, same sort of shape we see in the clouds. They're all similar. And this sweep, this line of cloud continues with these trees, just like this line of meadow continues this way. And this line goes over here. Now watch what's happening with my pen. It goes like this, it goes like this, it goes like this, it goes like this, it goes like this. That is a big, what we call hub and spoke design. Here's the hub and spoke design, just so that you can see it. You put a hub, and the spokes, like a spider web, go out from the vortex right there. Now he's thinking about this space because he's learned how to think about this space by looking at other pictures. And he's also thinking, okay, I need to have dark and light to go back into space because the brain thinks in terms of going back by changing dark and light patterns. Dark pattern, light pattern, dark pattern, light pattern. Dark pattern, light pattern, dark pattern. That's how it works. We trip over these changes. He's also thinking about space the way you and I register space. First of all, he's constrained. He's constrained because you're looking at a certain ratio of height and width. That's a standard height-width ratio for Dutch painters. So he's thinking this is the size I need to make a painting, to make a marketable painting. You'll notice if I divided the picture in half, it's not where the horizon is, because that would put the picture in stasis. It would take out movement and we wouldn't feel as much space. Let me demonstrate. If I draw a rectangle and I divide it in half, it's flat like a flag. If I draw a rectangle and I take 3 of these lines, they're all equal, it stays a flag, it stays flat. Because what's fascinating about this is how small this is to this. Because we've got 2 options for reading space. The brain knows that if there's a lot of space down at the bottom, I have a great deal of ground to cover. And now I took this line, or this line, and I moved it up here. So I move that line up here, and then I can put another line up here that's even closer to it, and another one that's even closer to it, like that. Now that feels like much more space, and the fact that it's curved and wavy also makes it correspond to the experience of space. This is deep space, this is flat space. Now you can reverse that and put the horizon down here, so that the space you're trying to create, the big space, is the sky. So now we'll just do that. We'll move it all down here, which is what he did. He just turned this principle upside down, and we can read the picture as spatial as opposed to flat, like a quilt or flag. Now let's talk about how he designed what's inside of this rectangle. And let's do that rectangle right now. A tradition in this century was to first draw the rectangle. Then, a contemporary of Van Ruisdael's is Claude Gelée, or Claude of Lorraine, who's painting down in Rome. And he notices that if he puts the marks of the middle down, it will keep him from his natural biological predisposition to move things to the middle, which puts them in stasis and turns them back into the static flag. You're likely to put things in perfect balance, in perfect symmetry. You have this predisposition for that because order means you don't have to pay attention anymore. But you want people to pay attention to the picture. So flawed symmetry, as Leonardo da Vinci pointed out, is what gets people engaged in the picture. And this is flawed symmetry. This is not, this is. That gives us a sense of something that resonates with the way we experience the world. Not ordered, but needing to be ordered. And therefore we can feel like we can complete the picture as we bring it to order in here. Now he's using several principles. As I said, there's the web and spoke. So there's that big triangle going out to here. That's that. There's this big sweep going out to here. There's the secondary sweep. Let's go down here. And another sweep going down here. There's the horizon here. And then there's the meadow that's going back up. So we have these shapes, all basically triangles, soft triangles going out, and even subordinate one inside of there heading this way. Now if you've got a bunch of triangles all heading one way, you need to counterbalance them. So let's just simplify this design for a second. Bonk, 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 bonk. That keeps it flat because everything's going to our hub and spoke. So we'll take another design, and that's a triangle right here going in. So we've got movement going this way, and now we have movement going this way. That's pretty exciting because now we're penetrating the organization of the web. We've taken something that we've designed to have movement this way, and now we're having a movement going this way. See that? This gives me a chance to play with something that artists in the 1600s were especially fond of, and that is linear perspective. That is, that shapes of the same size, things of the same size, appear to get smaller in the distance. So that a little branch here in the road is bigger than any huge tree back here. And that's linear perspective. A figure here is that big, but a figure back in the road is only that big. So the branch is this big, but the trees are this big. That's linear perspective. And that's interesting because we experience space sort of like, but not exactly, like linear perspective. We sense that things are getting smaller in the distance. Now, he's got linear perspective, the two triangles, the hub and spoke, and he gives it more volume and movement because he's curving things. We know this from John Ruskin when he wrote about it, and I told you about it here. A curved line has much more energy than a straight line. A curved line has more motion. A broken curved line has more volume and more motion than a straight line. These edges are harder. Why is that? Why didn't he use broken edges? We'll have to wait for that. We'll have to wait until the 19th century for that to happen. And that's because when he tried using some broken edges, as different artists would, there would be no market because people said, that's not what I expect a picture to do. That's not the kind of information I should have in a picture. Remember, the first time people experienced profoundly broken edges in late Turner's work, or in late Rembrandt's work, or in late Titian's work, or in George Inness's work, or in the Impressionists, the first time they encounter that, they go, this is terrible. And then people come around and say, it feels like I see. I mean, things have more volume, there's more motion here. And we come to like Impressionism. But we didn't at first. So he's stuck using these lines. And I want to get some paints that will be from the palette that he had. We know with the kind of palette that was available to artists in the 1600s. There were about 65, 70 pigments that were available to them. One of the things the Dutch had as a special color was azurite. Now, they could only get lapis lazuli, which makes ultramarine blue, from Afghanistan. It was very expensive. But the azurite, that came from Germany, and it was much less expensive and gave them a good blue. They would use both. But he would use more of this color, the azurite-based color. It's a little blue-green compared to the ultramarine blue, which would be this. And he would have lead white. Well, I can't buy lead white anymore. It's not for sale because it's a health hazard. So I can buy titanium white, which he would have liked because it's whiter than lead white. Now I need the neutralizing color to the blue. A red oxide, an iron oxide color. That could be umber, burnt sienna, raw sienna, Van Dyke brown, which is interesting because Van Dyke was a student of Rubens, painting in Antwerp, right nearby, and he discovers that he wants to use this very inexpensive, dirty brown. They're all basically iron oxides, but there weren't good yellows. There were no cadmium yellows. There were no chrome yellows. So a yellow would be sort of dull. Now this is a gamboge yellow, which did exist at the time. Now I've got the yellows, the white, the iron oxide, the burnt sienna, the sienna color. And if I mix any of these colors, I can get colors that are parallel to this. There are very few colors here. Let me just show you. I'm going to take a little bit of this yellow and I'm going to mix it with the azurite that he had to get a green. Now, because there's some translucence to that yellow, the green is a little bit luminous. Because this is darker, I'll get a different kind of green if I mix that. Very shortly, I'm going to run out of fingers. I'm going to mix that with this. Now there it is. And you see that it's a much inkier green. See that? It's closer to that. See this? It's closer to this. So from the blues and the yellow, I'm getting a green. He doesn't really need to have a green. He can mix it from his yellow, just like Velázquez was doing at the same time, but down in Spain. Now I've got the white and the brown. If I take this blue, right there, the same blue I had, and I mix it with brown, I want you to see the difference in the different grays, because you see these beautiful pewter grays? I want you to see how he made them. So we're going to take that blue, there's the azurite, there's the ultramarine blue. Now that gives me that kind of a gray. Do you see that? And if I add a little more blue to it, you see me getting gray. Now let's just add a little bit of white to that gray, and you can see that I have created different values of gray that are those grays from that brown and that blue. But what happens if I go to that blue, and I'll take some white, and I'll take that brown, and I'll mix them together? Do I get a different kind of gray? Let's just see. I do. I can get different qualities of gray, and I want you to see how they're warmer or cooler, the grays. And it's not the same gray as this gray. This is a more violet gray. Now, all of these things are considered shades when they're in grays. And shades have the feeling of having black in them, whether or not there is black in the color. There's no black in the color, but it feels like it. And that's because I don't want to mix too many colors. Every time I mix a color, and Jacob knows this, I'm going to subtract light. And what's the goal of this painting? Is the goal of this painting to show you exactly what this road looks like and what those buildings look like? No. The road doesn't look a thing like this. Those trees aren't all exactly in that position. No clouds modeled for this picture. It isn't about information. It is about a psychological effect. Based on historical painting models, it's about a psychological effect that he wanted to get. He wanted to get a sensation of place and sky and movement. He didn't want to create just a map or a set of symbols. He wanted something that felt as though it was alive. And life depends on light. Now, this beautiful light was dependent on not getting too chalky, not overmixing his colors. So he's kept the palette restricted. If you put down 20 colors and you try to mix them, you're going to get a very chalky, dull, light-absorbing picture. And he wouldn't have liked that. And I'm going to wager neither would you. So now we're going to take these colors and push them around on this surface. You'll see that this ratio of height to width is not the same. You can take this design and you can stretch it like a piece of taffy. You can compress it like an accordion in any direction. It's very elastic. He knew that. And I'm going to show you how you do that, because remember, it's not the information you're pursuing. And this has got to be inspiring. So the next thing I'm going to do is push this paint around. So I'm going to get some brushes now. Right over here, pick up my paper towels, which Jacob van Ruisdael did not have. He had cloth. This is a bottle of linseed oil. I can use poppy seed oil or walnut oil. And by the way, if this were a bottle of gum arabic and I added powdered pigment to it, I'd be making watercolors. And if it were gum of tragacanth, which is another tree resin gum, and I just put a little bit of that with some powdered pigment, I'd have made pastels. And if this were a plastic polymer and I put some powdered pigment with it, I'd have made acrylics. But we're in oil right now. So I'll put that down, and I just poured that in here. I have nothing but linseed oil in here. I don't have any varnish. I don't have any terp. In fact, I'm not using anything toxic. I'm using a vegetable oil solvent to clean my brushes, and I'm using linseed oil to paint with. It's as safe to breathe as painting watercolors, and safer than acrylics. Just a little tip. So I'm getting brushes, and I'm cleaning them for a moment in the linseed oil. You can clean all your brushes in linseed oil and then soap and water, and you're ready to go. I myself never clean my brushes. I don't recommend that to anyone, and I wouldn't tell my children that, but I'm telling you. Last one. And I'm using what Jacob van Ruisdael didn't have. I'm using a synthetic sable. He had the real sable. Now, he could make his own brushes at that time, and he did know how to make them. Now, he's got a sketch. He probably did it with a crow quill pen and some brown ink, and maybe some watercolor or some water into the ink to create his sketch. He did a sketch, then he colored the sketch monochromatically, probably in brown, as I say, inks. And that ink would be this color. Now we're skipping that stage to go to the painting stage. So the first thing we're going to do is mix this green blue. And I'm going to take some of this ultramarine blue and this yellow, and I get a dark green. Now I can neutralize this with a little bit of this, the brown. and I'll get something that's neutral, but all three of these colors are translucent. So light is going to bounce off this light ground. Now I'll take that. Here's the middle, and I know I'm below the middle. See that? I'm below the middle. And I'm going to just fill that in. This is linen, and it's quadruple hand prime with oil. It has a little bit of a pale yellow cast to it. Now there usually needs to be an illusion, and we've got this little shape. Don't think of it as a tree, think of it as a shape. There are no trees, there are no clouds, they're just shapes and textures. Right here. So I've created a silhouette that has some resonance with this silhouette. That's all. Just something in common with that silhouette. I'm not trying to exactly imitate it, just in principle. Then I know that I've got this big sweeping triangle, and I have these other triangles that we talked about going off to that hub and spoke out here, just like this. And I'll lift some of that paint off. I'll delete the paint so that more light will come back to the eye. Remember, the painting is about the sensation of light, the psychological experience of not just the content, the subject matter, but the feeling of the light, of the atmosphere, of the air itself. I'm not going to use this brush except for dark colors because it's got one color on it that would pollute any other color it would touch. So I'll set it down. You wait there. Not there. There. This, by the way, is my standard palette. This is what I generally work with. I'm going to raise this up. And that's why I have this easel that will do this. Look at that. As I look at this dark, and this is the key to painting, you have a design, you have an expectation. Don't cling to your expectation. Don't try to pursue details. Da Vinci says to pursue detail is to hinder the experience of detail. To pursue just the design at all costs is to thwart the possibilities of the painting becoming something. Here's something we know about color. Just as we experience space as congregating at one or the other side, we experience linear perspective as things going back and getting smaller. Color also recedes. The yellows and reds disappear into the distance, and things tend to go grayer and bluer. That was an observation made by Da Vinci in his notebooks. And that's an observation that Van Ruisdael is following here. The distance is blue-gray. The proximity is redder and warmer. Now I'm going to take this brush, because it's already got a bunch of green, and just increase the ratio of red-brown, and put that, like that, in here. And that's going to make it feel like it's a little darker and a little warmer. Now I'm going to delete some paint. And I can do that with a brush or without a brush. And I can do it with or without oil. And I've got this pattern of dark, light, dark, light. So we've got the triangle taking us back into the distance. And even the road itself. We'll just put that in. Details are last. General to the specific. That was his principle too. And a little bit of this light back there, because the principle is light, dark, light, dark. We can feel the ruts in the road. And now you can see how the warm territory comes forward. And it's a little bit fuzzy right along in there. See, it's a little fuzzy. And if I need to pick up more and play with some of the shapes in here, just some of the lights and darks. There are lights on the edges. And lift up some of the light because we can see through the trees a little bit. So we see through the trees. Now I'm going to go dip my finger into linseed oil. You may wonder that I'm painting so much with my finger. Da Vinci was a finger painter. Titian, what became more and more as a finger painter the older he got. Rembrandt, a finger painter. George Inness, a finger painter. Turner paints with his fingers. We don't have to be married to the brush. This is an excellent set of tools, as artists have used for a long time. There's a lot of versatility in this with a rag. So now I'm going to lift the light a little bit more because I now have oil on this rag for my sketch. And I have some oil. I'll apply that over here. And you can see how it's getting lighter and lighter. And I'll get some more oil. And I'll pinch this closer together. The closer I pinch this territory, right in here, the farther back it goes because the road is getting tinier and tinier. It's the same width road here as here, but we experience it as far back because the road is getting narrower. It's like looking down the railroad tracks. We know the railroad tracks aren't really getting closer together in the distance, but we see them as if they seem to be getting closer and closer together. And now, with even more oil, I get more light. And that light is bouncing back to you. So luminance depends on brightness. And brightness can come by adding paint, but it's generally easier to subtract or delete the paint to get some of that brightness, which was a recipe that not only Van Ruisdael follows, but so does Turner. Now I can adjust how light and how dark, which is what he did, how light and how dark. I can also play with the shape, the outside edges of the shape. So if I think this has gotten too tall back here, and I do, I can carve it down. It's very plastic. And I'm going to carve it down a little bit more. The other thing I'm thinking about, Daniel Levitin has written about in his recent book on This Is Your Brain on Music, rhythm and pattern. We experience pattern that is boring, bonk, 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 in music or in painting. So we need to give the pattern some difference. Bonkity bonk, 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 bonkity bonk, 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 bonk. That's much more interesting than bonk, bonk. And that's the rhythm that we have to play with here. And that's just what Van Ruisdael does, is he plays with a pattern that is echoing what happened before, but not exactly repeating it. A little bit more linseed oil. Remember, I could be dipping into poppy seed oil. What's the difference? Poppy seed oil yellows less and takes longer to dry than linseed oil, for example. Now that's a more interesting shape with more variation than I had a minute ago. And I'll come into this and start playing with that shape. He uses an absolute triangle. See, it's not round. This is how we conceive of a tree. I'm going to come down here in the palette. This is the iconic idea of tree. Circle with a stick. Just as there's an iconic idea of a house that you and I have, sort of a monopoly house. But if I'm in Tuscany, I'm going to see a lower sloped roof. And my icon will change. Environment changes the icon. He's got an icon too that he's responding to. That's why his trees are all rounded and his clouds are rounded. But he's trying to break the symbolism of the shape, the iconic hold of the shape, by giving them a little more variation. but the icon is still present. It has a grip on us. It has a grip on our memory and imagination. We can't really get free of it because we can't really get free of models. So if I pursue this triangle idea and give it a little bit of an angle like that, I'm getting closer to the experience that he has. Let's get the road pattern going a little bit more in here with these rivulets in the road. And they're all just diagonals, what we call today recessional orthogonals. And interestingly, that's not how they used language. They didn't think of things using the same language. They used the language of the 1600s in the Netherlands. One of the things that they would have been talking about is the unifying effect of the light. And if you were Dutch at that period of time, you'd talk about houding, H-O-U-D-I-N-G, Rembrandt van Ruisdael. That's just a term for talking about how am I going to get a unified light? And you're getting the idea down there. These shapes have their echoes in these shapes, as I've mentioned. So let's try some of those grays up in here. And to do that, I can use, again, a 2-inch brush. So I've dipped it in the linseed oil. I'm going to take this blue, and this blue is this blue. This is a lot of lapis lazuli to cover for blue, so he didn't. He used the cheaper azurite. This was called color breaking. When you mix these opponent colors, you're breaking the color. Let's do this. Let's do this to create a gray. And I just want you to see that neutral gray. And if I want the gray to be bluer, in other words, less warm, I just keep adding this. Now, to have a harmony with this color, I'm going to add some of this to the gray. And give me a clean finger again, thumb. And you see, from right here, it's warmer, and right here, it's cooler, because I've added that quality of azurite. And I'm going to put some of that cloud territory in this way with those grays. And you can see how I'm shaping, coming into these tree shapes with that gray, breaking them down, making them even smaller because they're still too large. Whatever we think of, we tend to make too large because it's what we can identify. What we don't think of, what we don't pay attention to, we make too small because we haven't paid attention to it. So if I can identify the trees, I'm going to make them too large. So I'm coming down in here and make those trees even smaller. He reworked it too. This is taking some time in his own studio. This is not what he does on a Saturday afternoon. This happens over time. Back to the linseed oil, and then I wipe it off so I don't have too much. Too much and it starts dripping and frustrating me. And I made enough, hopefully, that I can keep painting with it. We've got this. This cloud is biggest because it's closest. These clouds are smallest because they're furthest away. What is on the horizon is furthest away. What is up here is closest to me. One tradition was to start at the top of the painting and work your way down. And you did that because you had a drawing underneath the painting. But not everybody does that. Van Goyen doesn't, and he doesn't necessarily either. Sometimes you just see where this paint's going to go, and so you can work over the whole painting. Rembrandt would work over the whole painting. There are different schools of thought. So we're taking this, and I'm going to roll it. See how my finger is on the brush, by the way? I'm not holding it way down here, hoping for the best. I'm manipulating these bristles like fingers on a keyboard. I have more control of the brush by doing this. The Dutch like to think they had 3 distinct schools of thought. Now, you want to integrate, have a plan, follow the paint, and develop your skills. You want to do all 3. And I have another one that's happening right in here. And this goes over here. And I think I'll chop off, don't let them be so spiky at the top, and a little bit darker down in here. And by treating my brush in a fairly cavalier fashion and rubbing it around like this, I have kind of tried to prevent myself from making iconic clouds. I showed you an iconic house. I showed you an iconic tree. What is an iconic cloud? Well, it's kind of like an iconic rock, and it's what you're probably going to do and what you'll want to be aware of. It's like a caution sign I'd like to have in my head and yours. Let me show you again. This is an iconic cloud. It's a cartoon cloud. It's going to give you a legible iconic clouds, which is perfectly fine unless you want to trigger a sensation in the viewer of something that feels like nature. Now, you'll notice that Mr. van Ruisdael does have something of that iconic cloud aspect to him. And later, artists will really try to purge themselves of that. Turner, Constable, but these are 2 centuries later. And they do that because they've been looking at the clouds, they've been looking at other paintings and seeing how to get the effect of being in front of nature. He's not in front of nature, so it's not going to happen. Now the lights and darks, we've got that beautiful blue, which by the way is a bit complementary, that is a bit opposite to this warm color down here, that azurite blue. Let's get some. I'm going to go back over here and pull out another 1-inch synthetic sable brush, put it into the linseed oil, clean it up a bit, dip it into the white paint. Now, the azurite. There it is. Now there's something he notices, and I want you to notice this too. On the horizon, generally, depending on the direction of the light, we notice that the sky is less saturated and lighter in color blue here than it is up here. Do you notice it got deeper saturation, more azurite, less azurite, more white, less white, less blue, more blue. I'm down into here, back into the cookie jar, and down, and start playing with this shape and make it smaller on that horizon. Oh, and as I dissolve a couple of these edges, which he's really not doing, I'm doing it because I know what he doesn't know, the effect of Turner and Monet and Innes, because they haven't been born yet. So I'm going to make a couple of modifications to include some other centuries of development in art history, and I'm going to take this shape and tuck it back in there. I'm going to take you and move you there. I'm going to let you scoot up a little taller there. I'm going to come back over in here and get some light on this side of the cloud. Now inside of the cloud, it's a soft graduation of space. Only on the outside edges of the cloud is what we call a linear shape. Da Vinci had discovered a century and a half before this that you want closed and open form, that you want some of the edges to be open. But the Dutch were a little more literal, with a few exceptions, Rembrandt being one, that you don't need lines around all the shapes. As he ages, he starts taking out some of these lines too himself. But I'm modulating the values. And when I modulate the values, do you see that? It gives it a little more volume. Without putting the background blue in, you're already seeing volume. And you're seeing volume because of the soft dissolved edges. Dissolved territories, which gradually shift from light to dark, create a sensation of volume, of expanding. Now we'll take this color and test out the value up here. Go back into the linseed oil as I play with the oiliness of the paint. I've left those light areas open. Here we go a little bit more. And way back here, I don't even know if you can see it. There's that blue right there. Very gray, very soft in the distance. That distance, which is all the way to the far left, is called the distant visual goal by artists today. And it's an allusion to infinity. Whether you're doing a still life, or whether you're doing an abstract, or whether you're doing a landscape, a reference to infinity helps expand the space. It can be very small, but still it lets the painting breathe with a sense of great space. And that was important to him, to me, and hopefully to you too. So now we'll go back in here and play a little bit more. I'll increase the saturation of the blue at the top. Let's put some of it over here too. There's a little bit of that green in here. That yellow really turns this blue-green azurite into a green in a hurry. So I'll go back up here to create a little bit deeper gray. And then back into the linseed oil, which kind of cleans it off. Steal some more white. You notice I'm not dipping my brush into that white so that I don't pollute the color. I take the white I want and I move it to some other place. So we'll put a little bit of this in here and in there. A little bit of light happening there. More blue, more blue. Improve the saturation. The advice on improving saturation by deepening the color to create volume was described in 1396 by Cennino Cennini in his Libro dell'Arte, in his Book of Art. And artists had been reading that. They read it all through the Renaissance. It was a handbook that they carried in their hip pocket, if they had hip pockets in the Renaissance. I know they had nice hats in the Renaissance. So now I'm creating a deeper blue up here so that I can get that deeper space. And do you see a line between this blue and this blue? No, because it's a seamless transition of the color from deeper to lighter. And it's one of the beauties of oil, is it blends beautifully. It blends. So a deeper blue to a lighter blue. And that continuation of that blue to that blue over there is what we call a Poggendorf illusion. That pushes this cloud farther forward. Now I still need to pull out some light right along that edge, and that will give it a little more definition, and I can do it two ways. I can add some white, or I can subtract more paint. Let's first of all subtract more paint. If I feel like I still want more white, I will add the white. But I'm waiting to see how much I can do with this. And I'm modeling my forms some more, merrily modeling along. So here I will add some white, but if you're going to add white, you want a clean brush, or you won't be adding white, you'll be adding gray. So do you take a brush that you've been using with other colors? No. You take a clean brush, you go over here, and even though these brushes look like they're about 40 miles from clean, and they are, I'm going to try to clean it off. And I'll test it. I'll take my finger here and take that white, and I'll test my brush and just see just how clean it is, so that I'm not surprised when I get up here. So I'm just going to go in with this white. There we are with the white. And you see how I'm tickling with just hairs on the edge of the brush. So I'm not using the brush, womp, 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 womp. I'm tickling with the hairs on the edge. And if you do it particularly sensitively, with a very deft and light touch, there's more expression to be found in a light touch than a heavy touch. Now that's what happens when we add some white. And you see how I'm turning the brush as I'm handling it? I'm turning it around and around, doing things with it. Finding shapes inside of the shapes and so forth. Well, let's just try the complement. I've got the nice clean white. So I'm just down here to this iron oxide, which is a little bit warm and a little bit complementary to this, just a little bit. Now the principle existed because we know even Renaissance artists did it. Correggio did it. Da Vinci did it. In fact, what he would use is carmine. This is carmine. It's a little bit that way. Now we'll mix it there. It's a little bit warmer, and I'll put that little bit of pink, just a touch. See how that gives it a little bit more volume? Just because it's a little bit complementary, and we'll just play with it in here. Now, he's going to put some other values of gray in here, and I can use this brush because it's light, so I can just make it darker. I'm not changing colors in that I'm just making the value darker. Now I can't use this for white anymore. I've sacrificed it to the god of darkness, or the cloud of darkness. And I'll test the value a little bit darker. A little bit darker. See how I'm testing it up here? Now we'll go in and see about something a little bit darker and see how the values can change the sense of volume in the cloud. See how those darker volumes change the sense of volume in the cloud? So as I got the belly of the cloud gets darker here, and we'll play with some of this. The light will get lighter the smaller I make the light area, which is why he put that in there. Because if this stayed all bright, it would actually go gray. That's a perceptual thing that happens. The bigger the light area, the grayer it gets. The bigger the black area, the grayer it gets. The smaller the light area, surrounded by dark, you get sparkle. And similarly, the smaller the black area, surrounded by light, it gets darker. Because we see and perceive things relatively. We perceive height, weight, age, color, and value relatively. Now you see how those different darks have created another sense of volume in this picture. Let's go play inside of the lights inside of here for a moment. Can I use this brush? No. It's full of gray, and it would be mixing new colors into this gray. And we want something rich and deep and saturated. All right, to the edge. I've got about a 3/4 inch brush here. And I'm going to just carve light on the edges, which is what he did. Just a little bit of light. And I'm doing it with the corner of the brush. I'm finding that the trees are acquiring some volumes. as I play with the light. Do you see how they've just gotten much more volumetric instead of just a flat dark shape? Because the light against the dark gives us a sense of volume. Things start to expand in space this way just by giving a variation of light and dark. Now you see how that's happening there? And we'll even out the darks over here, go back into my nice dark base, find an interesting shape. Always, this is what Jacob van Ruisdael was saying to himself and what I'm saying to myself if I ever run into problem. I don't say, oh, what does a tree look like? Oh, what does an umbrella look like? I say to myself, interesting shapes, David. Better light, David. Purer color, David. Not, it doesn't look like the right shrubbery. If I pull more light to this far edge right there, I can direct your eye across the meadow. I'm going to show you on the other side. He notices this. This far edge, the light gathers on the far edge. See how the light gathers on the far edge? That pulls you back into space. And if I pull a little light through the trees, I don't paint tree trunks. I paint the light that is in between the tree trunks. Now, he might have shifted to a smaller brush. Maybe I should do the same. And do I have such a brush? Yes. In this vast panoply of brushes, filthy and dirty, I clean it off. I go back to the linseed oil. You're beginning to get my routine. This time I'm going to lift with a little bit of color. So I'm going to put, there's a little bit of red iron oxide that was left on this brush, into this Cambogia yellow. And I'm going to make the brush very oily so it can lift off and leave a deposit. See how it looks like the light is coming through the trees? Linseed oil, please. Thank you. And this picture is about the home that is in the light. You want to get to the home that is in the light. Oh, here we go, a little bit of this. Light, dark, here we go. Just a little bit more light back in there. So we can go light, dark, as I mentioned to you earlier. There would be no moral purpose to this picture if he didn't have a figure in it. It was a moral obligation of painters to make sure that they didn't just paint a landscape that was just landscape. They could do that in their sketches, which nobody would see but themselves. And it wouldn't be until the 19th century where we have landscapes that are just landscapes. Otherwise, it's too hedonist. So here's the figure. Now look, the figures, because of perspective, is just a little something that's that big, right there, walking along. And then smaller and paler when we get back to here. In fact, a fingernail's worth. I don't know if I shall lift the paint off because he puts the figure in light here. So we've got smaller ones back there, bigger one up here, and just to make sure you know, he puts a little shadow underneath it, and off we go down the road. Now, I'm going to pull the tape off to let you see, because right now the paint is flying off the surface, and when the paint flies off the surface, you don't have a window on deep space. For Jacob van Ruisdael, way back to the Romans, if you were reading Pliny's Natural History, if you were reading Cicero, what was the point of a picture? A window on space. So if I take this tape off, I will create a cleaner window and have a psychological window into this space. I'm going to take you from the 1600s here with Jacob van Ruisdael into the 19th century, the 1800s. New approaches to painting, new ideas about painting with Turner and Monet and Constable. Then we're going to go to the 21st century and see how we can amalgamate all of these traditions as well as what we're learning about neuroscience and perception and the materials I have to use as a 21st century artist.